is it a club? Do you think
Yeah.
you're a member of a club called Stoicism? And how do you feel about that?
I feel, especially on Reddit, you feel like in a good way you belong to something. Everybody wants to
Yeah.
belong, now.
Welcome, everyone, to the Stoic Salon podcast, where we talk about life, love, work, play, the universe, and Stoicism. Today, I'm speaking with Kasey Pierce, and Kasey Pierce is a writer and editor from the Metro Detroit area. She's written a prose horror novella called Pieces of Madness, which gave her residency at the Comic Convention Circuit in 2015. She joined the ranks of Source Point Press shortly after and created the Norah series, and this acclaimed movie option sci-fi kind of made her a bit of a household name in indie comics, especially allowing her the honor of becoming a flagship creator for the company. She's sold out conventions in the US, Canada, and overseas. And most recently, and quite interestingly, she's assisting in editing a graphic novel for Donald Robertson, who is writing a graphic novel biography of Marcus Aurelius, and it's called Verissimus. In 2020, just last year, Kasey Pierce was honoured to receive the Gary Reid Independent Creator of the Year Award, and she took over Red Pen Media, which is an editing company. Her interest in Stoicism started when she listened in on Donald Robertson narrating his book, his audiobook, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. Katie had found it on Audible in the summer of last year, and she really loves Enlightenment books and had just finished Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, and How to Think Like an Emperor kept showing up in her suggestions. I thank the Audible and the Amazon and the Facebook algorithms for bringing us to Stoicism. I have to thank, I think, the Facebook algorithms for bringing me to Donald Robertson a few years ago. Kasey says that once she came across Donald Robertson's book, she thought, yeah, I want to think like a Roman emperor. That sounds badass. And on that badass note, I welcome Kasey Pierce to the Stoic Salon podcast. Welcome, Kasey. It is such a pleasure to
Oh,
be
likewise.
chatting with you today.
More than likewise.
Yeah, I was just reading over some of the intro blurb that you sent me, and I just love the way you came across Donald Robertson. And I think that that's pretty much how I came across modern Stoicism and Donald Robertson. I think it was the Facebook algorithms that led me to him, and you said that you were reading a whole lot of Enlightenment books,
Yeah.
and Donald's book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, kept showing up in your suggestions.
Yeah, I had just finished Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, and it kept popping up, and I was like, how to think like a Roman emperor. Like I run my life sort of like an empire. That's how I approach it, I'm like, well, that sounds badass. I want to know how about this. So I listened to it, and I heard something just in the very first chapter that I didn't realize I needed. And what I needed was better coping skills with my mother's current condition, who has Alzheimer's. And I'm only 36. And so it's kind of a lot of, I don't want to say avoidance, but there's a lot of that going on. But anyway, so the first chapter opens with the Stoic acceptance of impermanence and Marcus Aurelius on his deathbed. And I remember I stopped in the middle of my jog and cried, because I was like, that is exactly what I needed to hear and what I needed to embrace. And then as the book went on, I kind of listened, and I was like, I've always thought this way about certain things, certain perspectives. But I didn't have a name for it. I called it being a mercenary. It just simply made decisions easier. Are you going to do it or you're not going to do it? You can't think about how you feel about it and then add layers and layers and layers of value judgments to a thing. I didn't even know it was called value judgment at the time. But you have to sort of desaturate everything and just look at it for what it is in order to press on and make executive decisions.
I love how we've just started right in the deep end. And maybe when I want to talk about your business, you called it an empire, so that really interests me. But I might just head back to your lovely mum and talk about illness and how a Stoic practice or reading the Stoics helps us deal with that. I think a lot of us, and I don't know, what do you think? Some of us turn to Stoicism or come across Stoicism via our Google searching for help because we're dealing with some sort of hardship?
I think so. I think when you're subconsciously searching for wisdom, thoughts become things. And I think those things manifest in our life through, and it doesn't have to be just Stoicism, but whatever works for us, because there's no experts and there's all different kinds of approaches to life. But this one in particular, like you said, maybe it's the algorithms or what have you, but it really resonated with me personally because I was already sort of on that track. I just wasn't there yet.
So how would you describe, what did you encounter in Donald's book and the Stoic kind of teachings? How did that immediately help you with your mum's condition? And can you imagine what things would have been like for you had you not been led to Donald's book and Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism?
With my mom, I think it was that it would do her not an injustice, but it doesn't serve her for me to be crippled by grief. And if I begin the sort of grieving process now, or sort of embracing the fact that everything's impermanent, you, me, my mom, relationships, the planet, it's all impermanent. And I think that will serve me later on when it is time to make those decisions and do what's best for my family in their best interests. I won't be crippled by grief, but I will have already been to a place where I'm like, I appreciate the time that I had with my mother because it was amazing, because I don't want to dwell on the process because it's the long goodbye. And she's actually in great physical health. So it's just one of those things where you sort of accept the new normal. And as I guess I don't see it now as the long goodbye since I've discovered Donald's book and embracing impermanence. I see it more as the long cherish, even valuing even more this time that I have with her and focusing on that.
Do you have specific exercises that you do when you are with your mum or with others? I know that Epictetus kind of says it. Is it Epictetus who says kind of when you look at your child, etc., think for just a split moment that you might lose them, and so that's an interesting practice to have. Do you have any little tips and tricks and strategies that you've picked up along the way in how you deal with that and the fact of impermanence on a daily basis?
I think it's not living in the future or the past. When I'm with my mom, I'm always present. And I think that the power of now is a very powerful thing. And I've done some death meditations before, so that does help. It also helps. It sort of overlaps with my belief in the art of allowing, or Taoism. The last things that run through your mind. If you say in a death meditation, okay, now you're dead. What's the last thing that's running through your mind right now as you're dying? Well, it wasn't that guy that made me mad at work the other day. It wasn't something somebody said on Facebook. It was my mom. It was my mom. It was the people I love. I'm like, well, if that matters in death that much, it should matter right now that much. So I always try to keep things in perspective.
Yeah. And is that kind of like a practiced and a learnt skill? Like, because I'm kind of curious, I'm really, really curious about how we do Stoicism in our sort of day-to-day life, how it looks and feels like as a practice, as a sort of intentional practice. So do you actually sort of say, okay, I'm going to do my death meditation now? Or like, how do you incorporate that part? Because even that we're talking about death is kind of interesting for me. I think a lot of people don't want to go there. And so I'm curious how you manage it, because I know that the Stoics, I think, just suggest popping in and out of the thought of death, not like ruminating, not spending too much time there. So curious how you do it.
I think having routine is really good. So I sort of make a list of what I'm going to do for the day. And it also combats anxiety too, to have everything sort of listed, like no matter what, I'm going to take 10 minutes to do this. I'll take 10 minutes to procrastinate and do whatever else. Why not do this for 10 minutes, something useful? So I think it's getting out ahead of it in terms of my own anxieties throughout the day. And it's not always the death meditation, but it's sort of, when I visualize things, I'm sort of floating downstream. I'm just letting go of everything, and just, but the death meditation is really useful to sort of, again, put things in perspective, getting out ahead of, like, listen, whatever you're worried about, whatever you have anxiety about in the near future, it really doesn't matter. And nothing matters that much. It doesn't. And thank God for that. You know, it's a very freeing concept. People are like, oh, that's pretty bleak. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. It does not matter that much. Yeah. Stop giving this thing power over you, or placing things on a mantle. I think the death meditation really helps with that too. But also before Stoicism, in my life, when I would get intimidated by people that had more experience than me, or who I thought had more experience than me than in XYZ in publishing, for example. You know, when I first became an author, my extent of English education started and ended at Schoolhouse Rock. And now I'm an editor 6 years later, and I love what I do. But whenever someone, like at a convention, let's say, would approach me and I felt intimidated by that person, or maybe they said something snobby to me, in the back of my mind, I would think, like, listen, Kasey, we're all going to meet up at the same place, the graveyard. So there's nothing that this cat has on you, nothing. And that was a very empowering thing to me. So I think subconsciously, impermanence, even though I didn't realize or fully embrace it at the time, it really has played a role in getting me to where I am today.
That is so interesting. I've met a couple of other people who kind of suggest that some of their Stoic practice that they've picked up and actually, you know, officially studied and intentionally practiced, that they kind of had a lot of stuff intuitively, even as a child. And you're suggesting that this whole element of impermanence, which is like a really key fundamental Stoic kind of practice, or, you know, intention, was there before your direct, you know, knowledge of Stoicism. So do you feel there is a kind of common sense aspect to it, or intuitive sense to it?
For most people. I think for most people. I think in any philosophy, there's bits and pieces people take from it. I just happen to be more Stoic than anything else. But I don't think anybody is like 100% Stoic, because there are some things like about Stoicism that, well, maybe one thing, the negative visualization catches me up. Like I also believe in manifesting things. So I'm like, okay, the negative visualization is useful to me in certain situations. So, such as like in cognitive behavioral therapy, and Donald talks about this in one of his Stoicon talks, where you repeat a thing and you visualize it, something negative that you know you're going to encounter. And as you keep repeating it and playing it over and over and over, the more ridiculous the fear seems. So it's sucking power out of it, but I'm already used to what this person's going to say, and what I might be feeling as a result of it. But you take the sting out of it when you just sort of prep yourself for that battle, that mental battle. And so that's where negative visualization serves me. Now, I don't sit there and meditate on, say, oh, I'm going to visualize all these negative things. And for some people that might work. That might be, well, that's what empowers me, because I keep playing it over and over. So when that time comes, I'll feel stronger for it. I'm like, well, I'll use it as a task at hand kind of thing. Okay, I know I'm going to encounter this thing, so let's just get it over with now.
I like that. I tend to forget to do that. So I'm always caught unprepared. But I'd gone to New York a couple of years ago and ended up at a New York Stoics meeting with Massimo Pigliucci. And he was talking about how he prepared for the day. So he would, open up his Google Calendar. And you know how you just check your calendar and you're like, all right, got that meeting. So what he did was look at the meetings, but then he'd kind of see who was going to be at the meetings and kind of prepare for what that person would say at the meeting. So he'd actually, prepare for his day by looking at his Google Calendar and predicting what would be expected from somebody in attendance at a meeting, which I thought that was pretty mind-blowing for me at the time. Thought that was a good way to approach the day. So he was always prepared for, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, because you're already taking people or dismantling people and seeing things for what it really is. Like, I know this person, I know how they usually make me feel, but they're not going to do that to me today.
Yeah. Actually, you just said the word dismantling, and in your email to me, you mentioned dismantling, which I thought was a really interesting word to use. And you talked about just dismantling things and events throughout your life, keeping me, you said, from unnecessarily exalting them in order to progress in my career and personal life, you said. And then one of the examples you gave was to do with food. So you'd lost some weight because and then you also, you talk about also dismantling people's opinion of yourself, and you kind of mentioned that just then. You talk about dismantling kind of like food, like just seeing food as processed carbs. And I thought that's really interesting because it reminds me of Marcus Aurelius when he talks about, like, is it Marcus Aurelius or Seneca who looks at wine and says it's just like rotten grapes, or, So I thought that's kind of interesting. Do you want to tell me a bit more about your dismantling process? And also, like, where'd you get the word dismantling from?
I don't know. I think whenever I think of what used to be of value to me that really doesn't deserve it, I thought I would place these things onto mantle, or if I get uppity about a situation, like I'm giving it power, so I'm placing it on a mantle. Like, this thing is really important, but as I just said, nothing really matters. So when it came to food, so I've lost 115 pounds. And I think a lot of my philosophy now started at that moment when I made that decision to do it. I was in my late 20s, and I said, this isn't going to get any easier. So I've got two options, and giving myself an ultimatum really helped too. Like, okay, I am happy and accept myself the way that I am, or I say I'm not, and I do something about it, and it has to be right now. And I couldn't lie to myself. I wasn't happy. I could barely fit into my size 20 jeans. So that's when I'm like, okay, we start tomorrow. And when I broke down the science of what was happening every time I wanted junk food, that helped too. That helped dismantle it. Okay, let's see it from a scientific aspect. When you eat processed carbs, your pancreas is secreting insulin, and it gives you a high. So all I'm looking for is to get high. And when I thought of it in those terms, because I'm anti-drug, whatever, but I knew that, like, listen, you're just looking for a high. In the end, it's going to be damaging to you, and you just have to keep your eye on the prize. And I did, and I gave myself a year, which is funny because the goal weight I actually dismantled too. I put on the fridge that I needed to lose 90 pounds because it was one less numeral. So to me, like, it didn't look as intimidating. And because the goal was to lose 100 pounds. So it took me a year and some change. And I eventually, lost over 100.
Wow.
But always keeping that perspective of, listen, every time I crave, I'm like, you're just looking for a high. Stop it. And it worked.
I love it. Stop it.
Nope.
It's like, what would Marcus Aurelius say?
Right.
Okay. I think I want to get back to your empire, because you mentioned your empire, and of course it was Marcus Aurelius and Donald who really enticed you into a Stoic practice. So yeah, tell me about your empire and how having an empire as a Stoic, or as a Stoic curious person, how does that all work?
So I think that started with another fellow Stoic, my editor, which is Travis McIntyre, who is the editor-in-chief of SourcePoint Press. I had one book out at the time. It was a single comic book, and my colleague, Greg Wright, was outselling me. Well, obviously he had 5 more books, and it was really getting me down. This was at Indiana Comic-Con 6 years ago. And Travis is sort of a habitual hazer, and he was kind of poking the bear, saying, "Oh, Greg's over here outselling you." And I turned around, and I was so tired, and I was like, "Of course he is. I haven't sold a comic in 2 hours." And I broke down. He's like, "Oh my God." So he put his arm around me, rushed me to the back where the docks are, where people load in. And he's like, "Listen, you don't need thousands of people buying your work. You need the right 500 to follow you." And from that moment on, that perspective made me realize that what you're doing here is you're building a brand. So what is your brand going to be about? And that's something worth protecting. That is something that does matter. So I saw my life and the brand as an empire. So what makes me? And I'm constantly evolving. Both of us, we're forever students. And that led me into, of course, being a published author. And then I started doing, we call them panels, like seminars on direct sales and books, because I had enough experience after a few years of what to expect in the indie comic book scene. And I was able to help people, and I loved helping people. That became very rewarding for me. So then that evolved into me becoming an editor, that involved into most of my followers are fellow creators and sort of look to me for that inspiration or for my services. But that just became sort of the circle that is me. I'm a lot of things to a lot of people, but it's my empire that serves them. And I'm very proud of the things that I've built over time. And 6 years goes by fast.
Yeah. Well, you said that the empire and the brand does matter. Why does it matter? And I'm thinking in terms of the whole Stoic scenario, why does that matter? Does it matter now, after death, as your reputation? Why does reputation? Is it reputation? What's going on there?
Part of it's legacy. But I think mostly because it's what serves people. It's what serves. That's the way I serve my fellow man, is providing them with what I know and what has served me.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it matters.
You'll be serving us because you're working on Donald's book, the Marcus Aurelius. So, oh my God, I'm meeting the girl behind that. Tell me what it is, what you're doing. What is your role? What's happening? When is it ready? We've seen some sneak previews.
So Verissimus. It's a bioepic about Marcus Aurelius. It's a graphic novel. It is absolutely stunning. Zay, the illustrator, does these gorgeous landscape shots, and everything feels sort of cinematic. It's got a very cinematic flow. And I'm very, very honored to be a part of it. I think we can expect it late this year. I know the pages have to be turned in by June. And I think there's going to be some pre-sales, and we're probably going to do some limited edition stuff, maybe a limited edition cover. And we talked about this a lot in the marketing meeting, and so that made me very excited. But let me tell you first how I got involved in this. So that was also kind of not a fluke, but I took a chance. And I loved this book. I loved How to Think so much that I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write the author a thank you letter. So I could only find one email, and I wasn't sure if it was one of those automatic emails. But I'm like, I'm going to send it anyway. So I gushed about the book and how much it resonated with me. And I told him what I do, a little bit about my experience. And I had seen from his Instagram, I'm like, wow, what are you doing in my waters? This is a comic book. And I thought where they were at in production, perhaps, well, they already have their own editor. They do have a main editor. And I was like, well, I mean, maybe you're going to need some proofreading services. I don't know. But whatever you want, I'm going to do it for free. So I didn't even expect a response. But then I'm sitting on my porch and I look at my phone and I see that Donald Robertson is now following you on all these platforms. And I was like, stay calm. Okay. So he sent me an email and he said, you know, I'm sorry to hear about your mom and I'm glad this book helped you. Da, 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 da. And he sent me some pages because he said, well, I see that you're a horror author and there's some horror aspects to this story that I think could use some emphasizing. Could you give me opinion on a few of these pages? And I did. I gave him my general feedback on what makes something scary. And
yeah, tell us which of the horror elements?
So for instance, the Cassius and the burning tower of people. And I'm like, okay, this is something that we should feel how horrifying this is. It shouldn't be just a suggestion. And I'm kind of sadistic. So I'm like, you need to realize that these men are probably crying out to their God for death. Let's make me die right now. And I said, so we need a close-up of that, their face, and I need to see them crying out to their God, et cetera, et cetera. I need the human condition to really play a part here. And I don't think that was one of the initial pages he sent me, though. But it was just little things like that. And after I gave him the feedback, he was like, okay. So he sort of brought me on the project as a sort of an assistant editor or an art director, I guess you'd say. And so me, him, and Z, we talk about how could we make this better, which, of course, making these things better are few and far between, only because Zay is such a great illustrator. But we want to, I think, the whole point of the graphic novel or the comic medium or the visual medium, for that matter, is to make someone feel something like they are in a film, like they're in the moment with this person, with whoever's narrating it. And that's my job. That's my job, and that's our goal, is to make you feel like you are a part of the experience and to really feel this sweeping epic for what it is, a sweeping epic.
Okay, so what's your take on Marcus Aurelius?
My take on him is that he always approached things as a student. Even in the meditations, he talks about the people he's learned from, and also the experiences that helped him learn things. So he was, a forever student as well. And I think that really resonates with a lot of people because he never had this, I'm a philosopher, this sort of boastful attitude. So that's really my takeaway, is that he was finding strength even in death. He's still learning, just right up until the end. And if you're not growing, you're dying. And after his death, or his physical death, I think that really helped with his legacy too, and his own empire and what he left behind.
So tell us a bit more about the comic book. Is it called a comic book?
This would be a graphic novel.
A graphic novel.
Yeah, it's over 200 pages.
Okay. So the illustrator, what was his name again?
Zé Nufraga.
Okay. He's Italian. Did he know much about Marcus Aurelius and or Stoicism before he came to the project?
Yeah, I believe so. He talks a lot about Stoicism and the virtues. And I believe that that's how him and Donald had initially met. They didn't meet because of the project. The project sort of happened because of their meeting. And I believe he was a Stoic before this.
Right. And so maybe now's a good time for me to ask you what I'm really curious about. How does Stoicism meet with the creative human urge or inspiration? How does creativity and Stoicism kind of connect? Do you have a comment?
I think it connects in that it's a lot of introspection. And when you are trying to express something that's introspective or that's inner monologue most of the time, I think it surprises a lot of people, and a lot of people feel that they feel familiar with it. And they're like, oh, well, I think that way too. You know, I didn't know somebody else out there felt like I did. So in order to express this introspection, this isolating of the ego, you know, whatever you want to call it, this work within yourself, to express that on paper in any way, visual or in text, that's a very powerful thing. And I think that's the whole point. Like when I tell people, when I give advice about writing, and this is my own advice, is that don't think about the reader. Don't think about, I'm going to set out and I'm going to write this kind of story. Just write. Just write as if no one is reading it. Write complete garbage and just streams of consciousness. Go back, clean it up. That's exactly what you wanted to say, and you are serving your audience more, because don't go out and find your audience. They're going to find you. Again, it's the right 500 people to follow you.
That's interesting. It's kind of like because it is a Stoic perspective, isn't it? To just show up and do your job to the best of your ability and forget what people are going to say about it or what people are going to think about it, because you can't control that, first of all. Right.
You can't control the way that they're going to respond. And somebody's always going to have something to say, you know, but you know, at least they're talking about it.
At least they're talking about it. Yeah. I think also the other thing that interests me is that being a creative person, there's this whole idea of being unique and individual and a bit of a genius. How does that fit in, and does it contradict a whole kind of more Stoic approach to things?
Well, because I am a genius.
Man, I can feel it, darling.
I think, I think going in, again, like Stoicism is about virtue and the right intent. And I think that when it helps you write a story because you're feeling it as you're writing it. And this is just like with anything, when you go into it with the right intent, I mean, with the right outlook, I mean, the result is going to be, I mean, it can't be all that bad. You know, it's probably going to be something very great.
You mentioned that you do that kind of view from above practice. How and why? First of all, tell me a little bit about what that means to you. What is the view from above for you?
Seeing everything in the grand scheme.
Yeah.
And I think when you do that, you get, you know, the aerial view, you get a clearer view of what is actually happening in a certain scenario or where you're at in life. And I think when you are in the thick of the experience, when you're always living in the thick of it, that's when you start to sort of make things up in your mind, and you center on only the feeling and you get consumed by it. And as Marcus says, it's just a feeling. Maybe that's not what's really going on. And as Seneca would say, we make things worse in our minds, you know, 9 times out of 10. I'm paraphrasing. But
that's a good paraphrase, I think.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10 is never life or death. It isn't. So if you always take that view from above, take a breath and say, okay, well, again, you know, it's going to dismantle whatever you think you may be experiencing or the drama of it. And then you're like, okay, this is actually pretty simple because life is easy. Life is simple. We make it hard when we get consumed by one thing that leads to another. Anger becomes fear, vice versa. It's like, no, just hang on. Let's take it up a minute. Let's really look at this. Okay, this is actually very simple. And here's what we're going to do. And maybe some people won't like it. You can't control that. Sorry. You got to move on with your life. Yeah. You're not going to be everybody's cup of tea all the time.
Okay, now tell me how you actually talk yourself through the view from above. Like, imagine you're telling me how to do it.
I would actually say make a list. Make a list of the things that you're feeling, and then make another column of what you know for certain actually is. And once you do that, you're like, okay, well, I don't know why I'm feeling these other feelings, or maybe 3 out of 4 of them, because these things, it just doesn't add up. I think seeing it like a math equation, and doing that, sort of doing columns, and that's with anything, just stop and make a list. And then that's the view from above. You're seeing it on paper, and you're just sort of like, wow, okay, all right, that makes a whole lot of sense. I need to take a breath and calm down.
I love that.
Thank you.
I'm going to do some columns.
I told you I was a genius.
That's brilliant. I love that. Well, Miss Genius, I want you to talk a bit about because you mentioned that you wrote this horror. I've got to get back to the horror stuff for a bit. You mentioned that you wrote a prose horror novella, Pieces of Madness, and then you got a residency at Comic-Con 2015. And then there was the acclaimed movie Option Sci-Fi. You became a bit of a household name in indie comics. So, yeah, you became pretty big and famous. And I'm going to throw some Stoicism in there somewhere. So what happened? How does fame and becoming a household name then balance with a kind of more, considered Stoic approach to things? What's the balance there?
So the balance is realizing that, again, we're all going to meet up at the graveyard. We all pay the same bills, and just keeping everything like that in perspective. And so long as what I'm doing is still in the vein of serving people, and I still feel the reward, like it would never get old. If getting a reaction from people or somebody saying like, this really helped me out, if that gets old, then you need to find a different business, because then you're done. So everything stays fresh, everything stays new, and the reward always feels great. And yeah, I think that staying in that place of being relevant in the industry, it's always asking too, what's next, and which is a very Stoic practice. Okay, well, now that I am into this place, how am I going to evolve and keep going and keep things fresh? And I always use the example of David Bowie. So when he was at his height of being Ziggy Stardust, his height, when he said, I'm not doing this anymore. And even his band that night, when he went on stage and announced that this is our last show, they didn't know it. They're like, did we all just get fired? But David Bowie didn't like comfort zones. He knew, okay, this has now become comfortable. And again, if you're not growing, you're dying. And he's like, nope, we're going to go on to the next thing. And then he just picked himself up and said, okay, we are going to go back to David Bowie, and we're going to evolve into the next song. Because you listen to every song, even on this, Spiders from Mars album, it's every song sounds really different, but yeah, I always use the example of, you have to ask what's next in order to stay relevant. You just do, because this landscape changes all the time. And that's just not in publishing. That's in anything that you do. Whether it's technology, business, publishing, what have you, everything's always changing. Everything's impermanent, as we talked about before. So I think you just stay ahead of it by asking, okay, what's after this? I mean, enjoy the moment. What comes after it too?
Do you find, though, that either you get like, say, when you became that household name and you had that success, and obviously you're still successful in what you do, you've got your empire. Do you find any weird emotions that come with that, like any sense of wanting to control the world or to be the best? Is there some sort of extreme, emotional response to the industry itself or to your own practice that you then have to consciously deal with, and you've got your little Stoic tools on the side to help you? What goes on there, if anything?
Insecurity. Yeah. Well, yeah, it'll always be a thing because you're looking at other people, maybe what they're doing, and they're probably selling better than you because they take a different approach. Well, that approach may not work for you. So I always like to say there's a reason they put blinders on the racehorse. Stop looking at everybody else. And you know that you got here not looking at anyone else. You get here on your own merit, doing your own thing. You need to keep that going. So what is your next own thing going to be? That worked for that person. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And I always have to remind myself of that because it's easy to get insecure about things.
I know.
And especially since COVID, like direct sales, that's where I shine. That was my bread and butter, was connecting with the people. And my royalty checks went when COVID struck and we couldn't have conventions. But my peers, some of them, my colleagues at SourcePoint, they're masters of the virtual sale. And I'm trying to be better about that. But I accept that, I'm very happy for them because it helps out the SourcePoint Press brand. And if they make it, I make it. And, vice versa. So if you see it as the grand scheme, you're less apt to be insecure about things that maybe you just don't excel at. And I'm not on top of my sales right now, but I'm on top of my editing. I evolved into an editor and I took over Red Pen Media. That was my response to COVID.
Was that during the COVID? Oh, was that a COVID response?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about COVID because and I was talking about this just about a week ago with a little Stoic meeting, and I was thinking about my response to COVID. I was setting up this new little business last year, just before COVID hit. So before March, about 2 weeks before March, I soft launched this business that was going to have pop-up events throughout Europe. And then COVID hit, and I thought, oh, great, I can't do my pop-up events. So I spent this whole, maybe 2 or 3 weeks thinking, I wish things could go back to normal, just totally focusing on everything that wasn't in my control. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting was I just ended up procrastinating for 3 weeks and not actually doing anything because I kept thinking about all the stuff that wasn't in my control. So I wasn't able to pivot. Everyone else was really quickly pivoting, that was the word, online, right? And you mentioned that you're really good at face-to-face sales, but you found the online experience different, more challenging. And I kind of felt the same, that I didn't want to just focus on online stuff, and lost a whole lot of time, worrying about stuff that was outside of my control, which led to inaction, which led to me not doing the best job during those 3 weeks. So I'm curious about you and your COVID response, and how did you then just flip into, let's just focus on what I can do? And did you think kind of explicitly? Did you explicitly reach for your Stoic tools, or was it just an intuitive thing? What went on with the COVID? Because that's a really big thing that we all had to deal with, and some of us either did it really well, or some of us didn't. How did you go with all that?
I think it was in July when I had listened to How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. So it was before that, just like yourself, I was feeling grief over, what am I going to do? And, but at first I was thankful for the break. I'm like, oh, thank God there's no conventions, because, when you're doing a couple a month and you're in this place and that place all over the United States and Canada, it gets grueling. So I'm like, oh, and I didn't think the break was going to be this long. So, and none of us knew that. And over time, that's when I started my own sort of 3-week grief process. I'm like, things like, is this it? Is this the end? Is this, because I don't know what else to do, and you sort of feel helpless. And I think a lot. I'm always about the art of allowing, and even Taoism. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to visualize not what I want, but sort of the feeling. How do I want to feel? I want to feel empowered again. That's really what I miss. And again, subconsciously reaching for wisdom. And that's when I found Donald's book. But because I'm like, okay, I'm just going to try to feel empowered, and maybe shut off my social media, because again, other people are so much better at virtual sales than I am. Stop comparing yourself, because it's not doing anything for you right now. And even just listening to songs that were empowering and just starting the day right. And that's eventually when my colleague David Hayes approached me, and he said, I believe in you. I believe in your editing skills. Take my company. And I was like, really? He said, yeah, you get all my clients, you get my clout, you get the whole 9 yards, Red Pen Media. He said, because he got a promotion, he's the dean of a college now. He can't keep up with it. And I was just floored. I was like, wow, when I let go, and just, it's sort of like fake it till you make it. I'm going to feel this certain way. And then eventually everything sort of just has to follow suit with that, fall into alignment with that. And I felt really empowered when I took over a company. I was a little scared, but I was just like, I can do this. I'm going to do this. And I know what I'm doing. I kept saying, I know what I'm doing, even though I was still learning. Like, I know what I'm doing. And I do know what I'm doing now. But
that's like a really interesting approach. Like, how do you want to feel? Because we want to feel like tranquil, right? And a sense of empowerment, not sort of reaching out and controlling everything, but just a sense of internal empowerment and tranquility. So that's kind of a really interesting approach to encountering hardship and sort of external stresses. I like that.
Yeah. Well, wasn't it Seneca who said that don't desire to be in harmony with nature, don't desire for a thing to happen. So I think, I know I'm paraphrasing, but I think that goes along with that. Know how you want to feel. Because you like so many things. Like, you like journaling, and you like doing podcasting, but how does that make you feel? And well, that makes me feel happy. That makes me feel fulfilled. And if you start feeling those things, other things that do that too will fall into alignment, and then you sort of evolve. Yeah.
That's really, I like that. It's almost like counterintuitive, but it actually really makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Yeah, and then once you tap into the feeling of tranquility, then the choices you make will be, more virtuous, I guess, to a certain extent. And
right.
Yeah, because if you're sitting around comparing yourself, I want to feel like that person who's got those sales, then you don't even know that that's just like totally outside of your zone of, control or even understanding. So
right, and by doing that, you're feeling a way that you don't want to feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're making things worse. Yeah.
And also the idea, you reminded me of, Epictetus, who says, he talks about sort of, you're a character in a play, and you haven't written the script, but all you can do is just play your role to the best of your ability. So that whole comparing yourself to what other people are doing is like you're comparing yourself to a role that you actually haven't been given to play. So It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And you can't write yourself into that other person's role, because you're not writing the role, you're not writing the script.
Right, right. Never be somebody's understudy.
Wow.
You're your own star.
To use stage speak, I love it. That's brilliant. That's so good.
I was a drama kid in high school.
Yeah, of course you were, because you're so talented and you're so creative. So of course, that makes sense.
Likewise. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you some kind of just quickie Stoic questions, like, who's your favorite Stoic of all time? And it can be Donald.
Oh, it can? Okay, well, we'll go with Donald then.
Okay, who's your second favorite?
I would say Marcus, only because, again, I resonate with that, being a student of philosophy, a student of the cosmos, Yeah, I think so. I mean, I love Diogenes as well, but
Yeah.
he's um, why am I blanking out right now? Um, Cynic. There we go.
The
So
cynic. Yeah.
I know that uh, there's so many isms. Come on, Kasey. Stoicism is sort of the tail end of cynicism. And I respect him for the way he looked at life, because he did look at everything, again, from above. Like, look at you people. Like, this is what you're actually like. And you think that you're this and you're not. And you are self-aggrandizing. And he really called a lot of people out on being that way. So, yeah, he's my favorite a-hole. So because
God,
you get it, you have to laugh. I mean, it's funny, but you get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it goes Donald, Marcus, and Diogenes.
Do you ever do that though? Do you ever like kind of fly up and then look down at you running around your empire and doing stuff? And do you ever think like, hold on, like what's going on down there? Do you ever think that?
Oh yeah, and you have to laugh at yourself. I mean, we're all hilarious. Sometimes I'll speak out loud, and my mom does this too. And I used to think that it was an Alzheimer's thing, but then I realized I do it too. Even like it'll be dead quiet, and I'll just say out loud, "Come on, Kasey, stop it. You're fine. Quit it." And that's a lot of me stepping outside myself and grabbing my face and going, "Stop it. I know where this emotion goes."
Hey, that's totally like Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations. He's like, focus. What are you doing?
Right. Get your head in the game. Yeah. Like Epictetus says, approach your life like the Olympic Games. And you can't afford to be distracted. Again, blinders on the racehorse. Like, come on, focus, Kasey. Come on. I'll even snap my fingers. Be like, what are you doing? Like, I'm trying to get in the game here.
I bet Epictetus used to do that. He would totally snap his fingers. I wonder if it's in anyone's account of him. I can just imagine him doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what's the difference between being a mercenary, as you had originally kind of mentioned, to being a Stoic?
I think Stoicism showed me that there are gray areas, because in being a mercenary, I was like, no, it's this or that. It is to an extent. And I think it made me, being a mercenary, there wasn't as much compassion as there is in Stoicism, because some people when I say the word Stoicism or Stoic, they think, oh, it's being void of emotion. I'm like, no. What it is putting reserves in the tank for the emotions that matter. So, you think of the adjective Stoic, like, strong and silent. Well, to a degree, but it's not void of emotion. There's a lot of emotion. I'm a very emotional person. I'm full of joy in life, like yourself, But yeah, I think that being a mercenary, the way I saw it in my mind was, it doesn't matter if it's, there are no gray areas, is what I would always see. I'm like, no, it's this or that. But it made me a more compassionate person to see it from more of a Stoic aspect.
And the other thing I'm curious about is that you said a whole lot of Enlightenment books before you came across Donald Robertson's How to Think Like an Emperor, Roman Emperor. So how does Stoicism then fit into all the other kind of Enlightenment books, as you call them? And how does it all fit into your little toolbox of Enlightenment texts?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlapping between like the art of allowing and Taoism and the things that Eckhart Tolle talks about. For instance, in the manual, in Epictetus' the manual, he talks about everything has two handles by which it can be carried, in which, one which it can and one which it can't. So some arguments are simply not worth the sacrifice of a friendship. So if your desire to love and have inner peace, it must be greater than your desire to be right. And that is something that Eckhart Tolle talks about. He talks about isolating the ego. Like, is this fight really worth it? It's probably not, agree to disagree. So there's a lot of that. And I think not being consumed, again, like focusing on the feeling, even, I know Abraham Hicks isn't everybody's cup of tea, but there's a lot of things that she says that are right on the money. So like Epictetus says, when you hear predictions about the future, don't become emotionally invested in that information, because thoughts become things. And if we are the master and commander of this vessel, which we are, then that thought becomes a thing that could take us into waters we didn't want to charter in the first place. And I think Stoicism gives us that kind of self-control, that minding the way you react to things. Like, is this really worth this? Or also the art of indifference, which I love about Stoicism. It's okay to not see a thing as bad or good. You can just sit with something and say, that's interesting. And I've done that a few times. In fact, the other day, someone said something to me in text, and it struck me as weird. I don't want to go so far as to say offensive, but it could have been. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Consider the source. This person is a good person, and you're probably totally missing the context. So instead of asking for clarification, I didn't do that. I was just sat with them like, that's interesting. And then I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure I just missed the context of that, because there's no way this person would have meant it like that. Yeah. So, and that's overlapping a lot from, again, the art of allowing. Just sit with something and say, oh, that's interesting.
I love that. And I don't know if I read this somewhere in some Stoic text or some meta text or some other text, or maybe my mum told me. But the whole idea, was it a Seneca? I really don't know. Anyway, it's reminding, what you just said reminds me of this, that if someone's angry at you because you said something, then maybe you actually said something that made them angry. Like, I don't know. That just totally resonates. The idea of like just taking responsibility for what you say.
Also taking responsibility for how you feel.
And for
people people say all the time, like, oh, I couldn't help but feel that. Yes, you could.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
It takes awareness.
That taking responsibility is it's a bit of a minefield at the moment. Everyone's kind of saying, okay, actually take responsibility. But actually the Stoics really taught us that you've got to, you decide. You absolutely decide every time if you're going to react to something or not.
Right. And, you're so free that you can choose bondage. You can choose bondage of an emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting what you say, that it's okay for things not to mean anything and just to sit with them. Because usually we place so much meaning on things, and that's where we get mixed up and we get hurt or angry or whatever. So, yeah, that's quite interesting, and that you actually did that with that text, which immediately normally you'd say, what did you mean by that? Or
right. What's that supposed to mean?
What's going on here?
That's the initial reaction.
You were my best friend. What's going on?
Right. It's always considering the source and, saying, well, it's even when somebody is legitimately acting a fool, and you have to say, okay, this is interesting, because is this person generally a good person, or I don't want to say bad person, but how does this person normally act? Well, they're generally a good person. And okay, are they just lost right now? Yeah, probably. It's okay. So that's interesting. I'm just going to let them say their piece. And later on, they'll probably realize that, what I said was wrong, and I'm sorry. But don't pick at a scab. We have that choice.
Yeah. Do you think that reaction is, obviously it's very commonsensical, and I think that you kind of learn it over time. I have a feeling that a Stoic approach to life becomes easier the older you get. I'm not quite sure where that theory comes from. It's just something that I've been playing around with. But do you feel that maybe a more Stoic approach to things is either more natural or comes easier as we get older? Like, does it require experience, or is it just something that you can learn out of a book and just become that?
I think it does come with getting older, because obviously as we get older, the older we get, the less we care. lest we, because you've been there before. You've been here several times before. People in their 20s, maybe they're experiencing something for the first time, or it's all fresh and new to them. We've been there, done that. So we've already dismantled that situation or scenario several times over. So you just stop caring. Like I had a client in her 60s, and she said, I absolutely love my 60s. She's like, I truly do not give a crap about anything. I've done 6 rotations around the sun. Like, whatever you have to say, I don't care. Yeah. And I love that.
Yeah. Okay, if your life was a Stoic film, what would be the title? Just to ask.
Oh my gosh. What would it be? Oh my goodness. I was not prepared for this question.
No, it just came to me. I don't know where that came from.
I'm trying to think
or who would play you? Which Stoic would play you?
Oh, see, that's even harder. Donald, no.
Donald. Donald would be fabulous as you, yeah.
Yeah, he'd look great in a permed wig.
Yeah.
I think, so my favorite part about Stoicism is not giving something power over you. So I don't know, something in the title to lead to that. The Dismantler. I don't know.
That's a superhero even. Oh my God, it's a comic book.
The Dismantler. Yep.
Dismantler.
Awesome.
Actually, you should write that one for the kids because they need that. They need to start dismantling much, much younger.
Oh, yeah. Well, especially the way the media is now.
Yeah.
Everything is in extremes. Everything is, and when you're young, you're very impressionable. And I worry about that with kids, teenagers, even people who are just entering college, the way the media has an effect on them, because of course they give you the most horrible headlines, everything to fear about the world. They even put music behind it, and it's funny because it's all theatrics. A piece of Hollywood, for example. Well, a piece of Hollywood was something that sorcerers used to cast spells on people. That's what they're doing. That's broadcasting. Oh so they're in your mind. They're trying to manipulate and capture, your mentality. And they do a very good job of it. But if you take something like, let's say, for example, black ants and red ants, and you put them in a jar, they actually get along very well. And what television does is it grabs the jar and shakes it up. And when you do that, they start eating each other. Oh, and I hope that parents have that awareness enough to sit down with their kids and say, okay, what you're seeing things in extremes, but it's not always that way. Again, there are gray areas in life. And you can have a rational conversation with someone who does not agree with you. That's okay. You don't have to be this team or that team. And I think that that's what's being portrayed right now in the media, in television, anywhere. And I do worry about that. So I think having parents with heightened awareness to that is going to be key in developing our future. A future society.
Do you see a series of comic books for the kids on Stoicism?
Oh yeah, that would be great. I know that there are some Stoic books. I know that Donald's daughter has read a book about Diogenes.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think, to do a Stoic comic book, that's something. Maybe that'll be my next project. But I think that Verissimus is definitely going to make a splash. It's definitely going to be a conversation starter for people who have never even heard of Stoicism.
And then it'll be the movie.
Yes. Dude, this plays out like a movie. I mean, it's a movie that sort of wrote itself. It wrote itself when Donald wrote Verissimus. I mean, you guys are going to love this book. I'm so excited about it.
We're dying for it.
It's stunning. Yeah. And people keep asking me the release date too. And I was like, it's going to be late this year is as much as I can say, but it's coming. It's coming. It's going to be worth the wait. I promise.
Good. Well, I think that's a good point to end that with that excitement of anticipation.
Yes.
Kasey, man, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure.
And we'll talk again when Verissimus is out.
Yes, we will. We'll talk again at Stoicon as well.
And we'll talk again at Stoicon X for women.
Yep.
Which will be exciting. And we'll talk about creativity. I've got heaps more questions to ask you about creativity and Stoicism because it's something that really interests me. And yeah, so we'll just keep talking.
Okay.
Yeah, Stoicism. And is it a strict kind of thing that belongs to a certain box or structure? How do you see Stoicism?
Oh, absolutely not. Because like we were talking about before about Stoicon, like some of the speakers, I don't know who it was, and it's probably better that I didn't know. They were making a case for Stoicism. Stoicism is liberalism because of XYZ. And like, be careful with that, because now you're alienating people and saying that they cannot have this philosophy. So you're segregating people into political groups or extremes, or and you're saying you can't be a part of this thing. That's not yours. That is not yours to own, to say it is this or it is that. It's a philosophy. It's for everybody, and it can be applied to anyone, any race, creed, gender, political view, what have you. And that's what I said. People need to be careful when they say, well, it falls into alignment with this thing. Like, no, then other people are like, well, screw Stoicism, then I don't want to be a part of it. You know, it's like a club. Like, you can't, then you get into pretentiousness, and then you stop being a student. That's when you start being this boastful philosopher, when you say, this belongs to this group of people. Join the elite, you know, and then it becomes propaganda. And it's like, no. Just keep it. And like you said, the Stoics were pretty loose, and they just set down basic framework. And from rigid application to modern application, whatever, even if you just want to take things from it, that's fine. You know, you're not exactly picking it apart. You're just using what serves you in your personal life. You know, like I said, nobody is 100% Stoic. We talked about the overlap from other philosophies, Taoism, Buddhism, what have you. And I'm finding that things from a philosophy that I've always had that wasn't Stoic-like is sort of, well, I'll take that back, that I didn't call Stoicism, sort of does overlap with this. And I'm sure there's other philosophies and religion that people are saying, oh, this is kind of like this. You know, again, because it belongs to everybody. It's a very universal thing. You know, we're all citizens of the cosmos, as Diogenes would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I really like the point that you're making. I've met quite a number of women, actually, because I've just been popping into some Facebook groups, like the Stoic Women's Collective, etc. And I've met a couple of women who said they came to Stoicism via Buddhism, and just how comfortable and familiar and safe it feels because of their Buddhist practice. So, you know, is it a club? You know, you're suggesting it shouldn't be. I kind of like the idea of that. Do you think you're a member of a club called Stoicism? And how do you feel about that?
I feel, you know, especially on Reddit, you feel like in a good way you belong to something. Everybody wants to belong, you know. Now I'm, when I couldn't be an active part of the comic community in person, I became an active part of a different community. I sort of evolved into Stoicism. And now, actually, almost all of my editing clients own How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. I told Donald I'm waiting on that royalty check. And he was telling me about how sales, you know, over the holidays were really well. I'm like, you're welcome. Okay?
It's you.
I'm over here spreading the good word.
It's you. Is okay.
Out of the streets with my Stoic stone, you know, waving the books.
I love it. So we can expect that Verissimus is going to become a viral bestseller because of you.
Absolutely, because I'm a genius. No, my God, I'm so blessed to be a part of this book. Everybody wants to belong to something. They want to belong to what's next. And golly, I can't tell you guys how much of an impact this book is going to have. It's going to change the game, definitely. It's going to be a staple in Stoicism, just like How to Think Like a Romemper, just like Obstacle is the Way, just like Daily Stoic. It's going to be Verissimus. It's going to be like next staple.
What's your favorite line from Verissimus?
That's a hard one. Because now I have to think not about the art, but about the script.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because you'd be thinking about the art, wouldn't you? Yeah, of course. Okay, what's your favorite page?
Oh, my favorite page? Gosh, I think the wedding scene between Faustina and Marcus is beautiful, the way that it's portrayed. Also, of course, I love the burning tower scene.
I'm looking out for that one.
Oh yeah, so the showcase of human suffering. It's wonderful. It's a good time. But I think when I went through the editing, so the first time, these were all just sketches. So I'm very excited to get to this page. Faustina comes forward and admits that she had been sneaking down and she was committing adultery with the gladiators. And I remember I put in the notes, the only thing I said was damn. And then I went back to the notes and I put in, are we going to be able to see that? because that would make this book all the more juicier, because I kind of want to see it. So I'm excited to get to exactly. Like, oh my gosh, suddenly it's just like, I'm not really into smut, but oh wow, okay. But there's a lot of
see it.
Right. Can we please see this? It's a lot of drama, lots of drama. But that's what you would expect from something like this. One of our friends said it's like 300 for clever people, and I thought that was really funny.
I love that.
It's raw, it's powerful, it's dramatic, cinematic, every other kind of matic I can think of. It's great. Again, it's going to be definitely a huge conversation starter. Great coffee table book too. It's going to be gorgeous.
Love it. I can't wait for it. Cannot wait for it. Alrighty then. We could go on forever, really.
I know, right? But we'll save it for the Stoicon too.
All right, we'll save it for Stoicon and to talk about Verissimus. All right, absolutely. Okay, give me one final Stoic something to take away with me.
Choose not to be harmed, and you won't be. Like I said, you're so free. You can choose bondage, and you can be captive to a negative emotion if you want to be, and you can give people power so easily. Don't do that. Don't do that. Choose just to say, that's interesting, and just leave it at that.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Kasey, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been
what
so
a pleasure
fun.
to talk. And what a pleasure that I'll get to talk to you again. So, yeah, on that note, thank you. And
Thank you.
See you again.
All right. See you soon. Have a great one.
Bye.
Bye.